All right, this is your last poetry lesson for the week. You'll have a couple more next week as well for your last week of school. Holy cow. But this one's kind of more, not serious, but like definitely not as silly as some of the other ones have been. But you could still probably make it silly if you wanted to. And I still want to talk to you about one more element of poetry, so I'm going to dive right into that. So one element of poetry is reminding you that you have to be really intentional or really careful with the words that you choose for your poem. So word choice in poetry is really important, and this will kind of walk you through why. So it says, since poems tend to be shorter in length, it's important to choose words for your poems carefully. Use words that get right to the point and paint a picture in the reader's mind. Haiku poems are a good example of this since they are only made up of 17 syllables. We are going to do a haiku on, I think it's Monday, I'm not totally sure, but we're going to do a haiku next week, and they're exactly right. You can only use 17 syllables, not even 17 words, just 17 syllables. So that one will be a little bit harder. But today our poem type could also be very important with word choice. And we're doing a fingerprint poem, which I had never actually heard of before. I'd never done this one, so this was kind of fun for me. So it says, your fingerprint is unique and special, just like you. It wants you to use a magnifying glass, but it's okay if you don't have one. Use a magnifying glass to look closely at your fingerprint and write a list of 6 to 10 things it reminds you of. So don't go literal. Don't say like it looks like waves of a fingerprint, because that's exactly what it is. It wants you to think of things that it reminds you of. It says your poem will use similes, so those comparisons again of like or as, and metaphors to compare your fingerprint to something it reminds you of. So begin your poem by describing your fingerprint. Each line following that should use words like or as to describe the print. And at the end, it wants you just to remind your reader of what it was you were talking about. And if you have your poetry packet, it kind of gives you the guideline for this, but you can also just pause the video when you want and write your poem on a piece of scratch paper. No big deal. So I want you to notice before I even start to read, a lot of these sentences start with like, not all of them. And then the very end, it reminds you that you're just talking about a fingerprint. So here's the example that they came up with. It says, my fingerprint, like a maze, twisting and turning round and round, like the swirl of water going down the drain, like a bullseye on a dartboard, like a road map with roads intersecting the land, full of mountains and hills with rocks tumbling by, canyons deep and wide, hard to jump across. Nope, it's just my fingerprint. So here's what I noticed. If this person had probably made their list ahead of time, they probably said that their fingerprint reminded them of a maze, and it reminded them of water down a drain. I'll just put water down. And then it reminded them of a bullseye. It reminded them of a map, and then maybe like mountains and canyons, okay? So that would be the way that I would start for sure. I would write down your list of things that it reminds you of, and then you can be kind of intentional about the words that you choose as you go to write this actual poem. I like that it sometimes starts with like, but not always, and I like that it does end the reminding you of what you were really talking about. I also want you to notice that the only times that they say fingerprint are in the very beginning of the first line, at the very end of the last line. So they don't talk about fingerprint the entire time, you're just more describing your fingerprint throughout. So here's the example that I came up with. And again, I started with my list. I thought mine looked like the Grand Canyon. And mine kind of looked like traffic, like if you're sitting in traffic. And then I thought it looked like a grocery store. You're probably thinking, what the heck is Mrs. Glassy talking about? But it looked like, if you had like a bird's eye view of a grocery store, it kind of looks like all the rows. I thought it looked like hot dogs in a pack, because I'm a weirdo. And then I thought it also looked like, if you've ever done one of those Zen gardens, when you have that cool little rake. I don't know if you even know what I'm talking about, but they have these cool little Zen gardens where you can use the little tiny rake to, it's like a bonsai Zen garden, which was kind of cool. And I thought that was kind of my list. So once I had my list, I went ahead and just started to try to write really intentional lines. And once again, I started with my fingerprint, and then the last word of my poem is also fingerprint. And sometimes I started with the word like. I also started sometimes with the word as. So I'm going to go ahead and read mine out loud. My fingerprint, like the Grand Canyon carved by the Colorado River, like lanes of traffic on the way to a Seahawks game, like rows of food and drink from the grocery store, as tight as hot dogs in an 8-pack, as smooth as lines drawn in the sand, as detailed as, nope, no, wait, that's just my fingerprint. So here's your page that you can do yours on. They gave you the example that I already read to you, and then there's just some lines. So remember, if maybe off to the side or even off to the left of this, you could just write down first what your thoughts were about the words that remind you of your fingerprint, okay? Or at least what the item is that it reminds you of. Good luck, and we'll do some more poetry next week. Oh, nice try. Don't forget to share it on Flipgrid. You can share it on Zoom, or you can always share it with your family.